My name is Eldon Dedini. I'm a cartoonist. I wake up each morning and try and be funny as hell. Often you start, and I'm sure all cartoonists do that, they don't know where they're going with it. You just begin.
Eldon Dedini has made a career as a gag writer and cartoonist for some of America's most prominent magazines. Eldon's career spans 6 decades, including work at Universal Studios, Disney, The New Yorker, Esquire magazine, and Playboy. Eldon's life began in 1921. His early years were spent on his parents' ranch in King City, California. This is the story of one of America's greatest cartoonists, Eldon Dedini.
I was born in King City, which people often laugh at. They wonder how somebody came from King City and became a cartoonist. But I think it was darn good. When I was there, maybe 3,000 people. And most of them from some ethnic group, you know, Hispanic, Indian, Italian, Italian-Swiss, Portuguese. I heard broken English, I think, all my life and didn't know it. They were all in the vegetable business, cattle business, rural, agricultural. When the sun went down, we didn't have electric light. You had a lamp, and you'd sit around the fireplace or the lamp telling stories and jokes. My own family, we're in the saloon business. People around bars tell stories, and my father filtered them down to the kids.
He was 3 or 4 when he began drawing. And his mother would give him paper tablets to draw on. And then I remember him telling me that at one point he was going through so much paper that she bought him a chalkboard.
But I remember at the ranch, there's siesta time or whatever. I had a notebook, and I'd look at cartoons, and I'd make up jokes, and I'd write them down.
They had a ranch called the Indians, about 20 miles outside of King City. And they used to have the need for signs on fence posts, you know, keep the gate closed, and he would draw those signs.
My grandfather had another ranch, the Wild Horse Ranch. In fact, we slept outside in the summer, looked at the stars. My aunt used to say, "Don't sleep under the moon, you'll go crazy." They're very superstitious. My mother taught school, country school, Little Red Schoolhouse. Hearst had 155,000 acres, and he bordered us, and he must have 30 or 40,000 cattle, and probably 5,000 registered bulls. Great big guys with numbers on their horns. They come up to our fence, not all 5,000, but you know, 6 or 7 are already in trouble because they see our cows. They walk right through the fence. The father was always fixing the fence. Well, after the second time, he just opened the gate when he saw them. As a consequence, after 10, 12 years of this, our herd was as good as a horse. We had big, sturdy animals. Once in a while, I remember I spent 2 days picking onions. We'd raise a lot of onions and sell them, I don't know, $1 a sack. Out in the hot sun with onions. Boy, you smell like onions at the end of the day. You can't believe. Sunburned and tired. And of course I was drawing then. And so my brother, you know, if there was a choice, I drew and my brother got on a horse and did other things. But in school, because I could draw, classmates would say, draw something on my t-shirt, or we used to wear sailor hats, and I used to print their name or draw a funny picture. I couldn't do a caricature at that age, but I'd draw a dumb head and put their initials on it, and they were happy. Somewhere in freshman, sophomore, I discovered there is a career as a gag writer and cartoonist, and I'm going to be that.
He had an art teacher named Leon Amix, who was really a mentor toward my father.
He's like a father figure. He said, make a portfolio, go down to the local newspaper, the Salinas Index Journal and the Salinas Morning Post. Offer your services to do cartoons for them, for nothing, for the experience. I learned 2 things. Make your deadline, listen to what the editor's saying, be astute as you can, you know, follow through, do it. Cartooning is self-taught. Anybody try to teach you cartooning, it's cliches. I mean, it's all right. I took a correspondence course, but that's almost what you learn what not to do, you know, because it's cookie cutter stuff. And take, you know, drawing, painting, learn, because you adapt it into cartooning. That's how I think my style resulted, looking at Bellini and Giorgione and Bruegel and Daumier, Goya. You know, that's where you learn. I was drafted, and I have a heart murmur. I remember going to San Francisco, standing around naked all day, and they said, you're excused, join the Merchant Marine. Well, I didn't do that. I went to Chenard instead.
In 1942, Eldon set his sights on Hollywood. He moved to Los Angeles to attend Chenard Art Institute. There he met 2 women who would be with him for the rest of his life. His future wife, Virginia Conroy, and her sister, Pat Carey.
Do you have any questions to ask me, Anson? Is there anything you want me to discuss? Well, I can ask him.
He's going to take you in another room where you can confess everything.
That would be very dramatic, wouldn't it?
And don't tell any lies. I became a janitor and got free tuition. And Virginia was a librarian. She worked for her tuition. So at the end of the day, I would sweep the library and she was still there and I talked to her. But I actually was conscious of her in the life drawing class. And I noticed that Virginia, or whoever this was here, that girl can draw. And she could, well, in my mind. So I always put my easel just behind her so I could watch her drawing.
He always says he just saw something in her work and saw the creativity and the capability in her art that he'd seen a lot of other people doing art. You know, you look over your shoulder in art class, and he had not seen anyone whose work was that purposeful and had meaning and power.
Well, that's what brought them together, and that's what made success out of their marriage. And they have had a lot of quarrels, a lot of yowling and yelling at each other, but basically they're together forever. You know, they belong together. They're just right.
He, like Virginia, like Pat, They're all trained in drawing first. Los Angeles was the drawing center for California. And a lot of times in the United States, they always thought of Los Angeles in their generation as being artists that drew.
Graphics is my joy. I love to draw. I got into pen and ink and pencils and cross-hatching. My brother-in-law was into cartooning. My sister knew what she wanted to do as a painter. I wanted to show human emotions. I think that's the most important things we have inside of us. And it comes out in the faces of people. And people have 1,000 expressions a minute. You know, we've got a lot of moods that go through us.
Then I met Pat, her sister, which was haunted my whole life and probably improved it.
Well, he has a very sarcastic, witty tongue, which goes with what he does. And sometimes it can become quite negative, but most of the time, since he was married and I was divorced and all that, he's helped me 20,000 million ways, for which I'm profoundly grateful. He's my brother-in-law, but my brother, really a brother, and I love him. I think that secretly in his heart, Eldon has always admired the fine artist. That's supposed to be superior. And Virginia has always admired the cartoonist in Eldon because she wanted to be one at one time. So they admired each other and they blended their talents together. And that was quite a marriage, you know. It's very unusual to have that happen.
I was impressed with his drawing and he liked my drawings. We liked to see art. We would go and see art in museums, and there was a camaraderie there. And of course, he was a man and I was a woman. And
I don't believe my parents really got together so much for love as they did truly for their love of art. And then it turned into a respect for one another's art. Always that true respect. And it's, you know, in the 70s, I remember sitting down at breakfast in the morning, and even after I went off to school, they would sit there and they would talk about what his art, what he was doing in his art, and she'd look at his cartoons, and they'd discuss reasons for something, or she'd ask questions. And almost the same sort of thing occurred with her art. You know, she would come home after a very difficult day, you know, at her studio, and she'd been doing paintings, and something wasn't right, you know, just frustration in her voice. You know, what do I do about this? Or what do you think? And it was always that back and forth.
I lived with Virginia and Eldon during high school in the mid-70s.
every morning, Virginia would critique his cartoons. He was up at 4 in the morning listening to KGO, drawing, doing his gags.
I'd put him by her breakfast plate, and I said, when you get through breakfast, if you're not doing anything, go through them, make 2 piles. Funny pile, dumb pile. We won't discuss it, but just do it. Then I'd look quietly later in the day, and I'd say, what didn't you like about this one? You know, might have been my favorite in the wrong pile.
And oh, Virginia, you don't know. God, you know, this is the way it went. His face, you know, eyebrows, and him, what are you talking about? And all that. And Virginia with her big wide mouth, kind of like this, you know, and he's screaming at him, ah! And, you know, her voice is piercing.
I always found that kind of an event to watch. It's kind of good theater. And you look at the women that he draws and tell me they're not, you know, they are. You know who they are when you look, you know.
People always ask, do you copy your wife? And I said, no. But there's something about Virginia, her big eyes. I've told people that I never really drew Virginia, but I was drawing her before I met her in the cartoon. So when I met her, I married her. The Muslim world and Iraqi and Iranian was on my mind, especially these burqas. and then the modern Iraqi-Iranian person. So the gag, this is the way I rough it to send to Playboy or the New Yorker. This woman is talking. I think it's the freedom of thrusting your hips forward. Okay, when they okay it, I get letters like this from Hefner and Michelle Urey. I think Michelle makes kind of a preliminary cut. I think she's a dynamite editor, and it's finalized with Hugh. He usually writes on it, okay, HMH, make the girls prettier. I kind of blew that up with a Xerox, and that's it. See, this is Arsh's 300-pound paper. It's really sturdy. I marked the dimensions of the page of Playboy. I just put that there, and I traced it in light pencil. Then I can paint without having to redraw. Well, I'm always redrawing and refining, but if you got to think composition and painting and all the problems, get the composition, then you could paint with a light heart and make it work. I used to use totally Winsor Newton watercolor, but with cartoons you have to make corrections. I use acrylic now, and I still use both. The Winsor Newton has wonderful flow. You could make flows with acrylic, but the opaqueness, you can correct areas and make it look flowing. No, you can't use oil because these got to dry and you got to mail them. Sometimes yesterday. Before you get to the drawing and painting, you got to have a gag, and it's got to be funny. You don't just sit and wait for a laugh. You get a subject, you have to have a point of view on it, take a position, and with cartooning, most positions are negative. You can't be funny about praising things. What's funny? What's funny is you take something that's real, you flip it, and you make it more real, or you take a cliche that's become stupid. It's that message underneath, and you find the laugh, and you doodle. You just doodle until you get it. Cartooning, as in writing, I think is revision. Revision is everything. You'd read a newspaper, something, take a line, just take the line verbatim. And even after you get everything, you write the line sometimes 20, 30 times. You know, one word doesn't quite have a flow, but another one can just make it explode. Now we're dealing with another religion and that, and you're cautious. 100 people bombed in a restaurant. Yeah, make a joke.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know. After 9/11, you know, I tried moolah jokes. That stuff. Yeah, but you know, that's difficult. It's how that philosophy affects the daily life of people in the modern world of how it's going. Who's got to adapt? From a cartoonist standpoint, how does it affect these people? Like we hear of Iranian women who want to have personal freedom. And I've been told by an airline pilot, they get on the plane with traditional garb and they get off the plane in miniskirt and lipstick. There's the area for the humor. When I left Chenard Art Institute, I needed a job. I had taken a course in set decoration, storyboard, set drawing, camera angle, and after 2-3 months, the whole studio went on strike. Hollywood was in a big turmoil. Then I still needed a job, so I went to Disney. Luckily, they took me in the story department, and I worked 2.5 years very happily.
And you know, he was a young, essentially country person in Los Angeles in the midst of a time when animation, the Disney experience was happening It was a big deal to him.
What I had started when I was in art school was accumulating. And after 2 years, when I was at Disney, I got a phone call from Dave Smart, the publisher. He said, "If I know you're at Disney's, if I double your salary, would you come with us as a gag man and a cartoonist?" And I said immediately. When Esquire came out, it was something, because they had full-page color cartoons. They were adult. That's why I never could sell Colliers or Saturday, but it's all this home life, domestic, husbands, dumb husbands, and mean wives, kids. I don't know, I didn't relate to that.
He'd started with the New Yorker in either late 49 or 50, and his cartoons were evolving and becoming more mature.
It was the publisher, Dave Smart, said, "You know, you ought to try the New Yorker." He said, "I think you could sell there." So on his instigation, I thought the New Yorker was, you know, so far above me in paradise I couldn't make it. But, you know, after about 3 submissions, I sold one. I thought it was a fluke, and I didn't send for about 8 months. And I got a note from the cartoon editor, James Garrity, and he said, "After we bought one of your drawings, we thought the least you could do is to keep contributing." God, I almost blushed to myself. And I've been sending ever since, you know, 55 years. New Yorker saw that I wasn't a one-joke person, you know. I may have a lot of bad jokes, but if you stick around, you're going to get a good one.
It's that everyday act of doing it that secures his place in the history of cartooning and the history of art. I watch my students, the first thing I tell them is, you're not going to make a masterpiece, so don't worry about it. The Louvre isn't waiting for you, just get on with your work and do it, and then something happens, it happens. And for Eldon, these things aren't questions, these things are not even there. He's going to get up and be funny, he's going to draw the roughs, send the roughs out, accepted or not accepted. The accepted ones, he's got to do the finished product. It's a job, and he does it.
Yeah, one time in the 70s, I just looked, somebody came into the house and they pointed out to me, "Boy, he subscribes to a lot of things." And I counted them up, and there were 26 different publications that came into that house.
How many magazines can you get in a house? How much information can you put into your head to have those gags come out? Because you got to feed the brain to put them out, and he's constantly feeding his brain. But the big file's in here, right? And that's the file that's got to be funny.
My father has a filing system that works for him. You name it, there's a file for it.
I'd read subjects that I knew nothing about, and often get an idea out of it. If you read between the lines, it all comes down to humanity, suffering, the irony of people, the stupidity of them. You can find it on any page of any magazine, newspaper. Just be open to the subject and what their concerns are. You know, I'm not one to psychoanalyze myself and deconstruct everything and ruin it. I've often said, I don't know how I became a cartoonist or had a sense of humor. I always felt if I analyzed it too far, I might lose it. If you want wrong answers, just start thinking too much.
He began in the 40s going to little dive clubs in Los Angeles where there were musicians, African Americans who played jazz. And when he came to Monterey, that was continuing because the Monterey Jazz Festival was beginning, and after that he would invite people to our house. You'd have black, white, all these different people that would come in to hear their viewpoint on life, their take on life, and to begin to incorporate that into your own world.
Turk Murphy was in the band. Bob Scobie, called the Dawn Club. Oh, I thought that was wonderful. But then we went to the Black Hawk. Miles Davis played, Oscar Peterson, Dave Brubeck, Jerry Mulligan. Yeah, Mulligan was around San Francisco, Fantasy Records.
I think with Duke Ellington.
So we went up, introduced himself, get some pictures, fine. And he said, Eldon here does a lot of jazz cartoons, which I did. He said he did one on your band, which I did. He said it appeared in Colliers. And Ellington kind of looked, and he reached in his wallet. He takes out, you know how people sit on their wallet, everything gets kind of stuck, and he was fooling there, and he took out a piece of paper and unfolded it. It was my cartoon. That's like coming full circle. You do things, but you never know what happens. Man, here's a guy that not only saw it, put it in his pocket and saved it.
Ed Ricketts, made famous by John Steinbeck's novel Cannery Row, owned a shack called the Pacific Biological Laboratory.
In 1948, Doc Ricketts was going out for beer one evening, and a train hit him here, Cannery Row. And shortly, Harlan Watkins came down from San Francisco. He taught English literature and world literature, and so he knew Steinbeck and the whole thing, saw the place was vacant, got the place for $40 a month to live.
The lab is on what's now known as Cannery Row. And it was started by a group of guys, all prominent, all of them. I think maybe 20, 25 guys, dentists, doctors, you know, and they all love jazz.
We incorporated under Doc Ricketts' name, Pacific Biological Laboratory.
They all love to discuss, you know.
I learned more at this bar than any place in the world. The other two cartoonists were Gus Areola, who drew Gordo, and Hank Ketchum, Dennis the Menace.
Great musicians, jazz artists, would sit there until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, drinking straight bourbon, whiskey, playing.
Well, Earl Father Hines, Percy Heath, they played at the festival. And then many of the members here were on the board, and they say, you know, I got nothing to do, come down, have a drink, whatever. Oh, Phil Woods, kind of a hipster, bopster. He never went home. He and I sat here, he was in love with whatever. And finally, around 4 o'clock, he went out the door, and I saw him go up the street. He still had a glass in his hand, his horn, walking up in the night.
The lab really served as a meeting point for a whole bunch of people. Again, through the Jazz Times and the Monterey Pop Festival, you know, you'd have all sorts of different people coming to the lab after he played. Just like a bar, they had the hanging glasses, and there were martini glasses, and margarita glasses, and white wine glasses, red wine glasses, highballs, whatever it might have been. It was all there. I remember going through in the bathroom at the lab was this funky old mirrored cabinet, but there were all these different old apothecary jars and bottles that had handwritten labels on them. Small to medium-sized to horse-sized pills, and they would say light hangover, medium hangover, heavy hangover.
They had fun times for a long time. Good music, good living, good food, but he is the guy, you know, the guy who is always making everything happen.
Well, a few years ago, we gave the building to the city of Monterey. And we've got 15 years more to come here Wednesdays, and we got a 5-year extension. So 2013, we better all be dead or we can't come. Yeah, he's run San Francisco. That was a Christmas joke. Cable car. The best, two little kids are talking here, and people got packages. The best Christmas present I could get is my parents renewing their marriage contract. That appeared in Playboy. You know, quite a plea for parents to stay together. Oh, I always like this one. It's a big scene. You know, they're dressed in Dickensian times. What we have here is gluttony and abstinence, ribaldry and prayer, obscenities and solemn ceremonies, dancing, screwing around, and saintliness. All in all, Christmas works. Italian art, the religious painting, Michelangelo, Tintoretto, Giorgione. I've learned as much. I just love it. The cathedrals in Italy and France. I've often thought if I lived then, I'd love to be up on a ceiling on my back painting. Those pictures were painted for people who could not read and write. They were sending a message. That's what cartooning is, sending a message. How the message is sent, the composition, the dramaticness of it. You know, when you get into the Impressionists, they broke up color and it's the mood and all that. No, they put, Mary there in a red dress, and the other guy's got a blue cloak. It's comic strip. Just bang that color. Keep it simple. He's talking about a drink here. It's a naive Hanshu sake without any real pizzazz, but you'll be amused by its transcendentalism. That's kind of funny. Que pasa, Hideki? You used to be a hoot. I've got Spanish in there and English slang. I don't know. Sounds funny. If it sounds funny to me, it is funny. Now I remember you. You got a C- in Kama Sutra. It's probably painful what he's doing there. "1960, Playboy. Hefner kept writing me notes, because that's what he said in the letter. I knew your work from Esquire, and I'd like you to come."
For decades, it was always the cartoon after the fold-out. And I could always pick up a Playboy, or when my friends would come over and we were 10 years old, we'd pick up a Playboy. It was like, this is where my dad drew. Of course, they'd immediately turn to the better pages.
You sit and you're watching him, and yet you look down and he's intense and drawing away, and you look down and there are these stacks of Playboy magazines. It was trippy to watch this serious person, this very strong Swiss Italian, drawing cartoons that are funny and sexual.
Doing boy-girl jokes for, 15 years with Esquire, and then you're starting with Playboy. It's endless, and it's like you're doing the same joke all the time. So, I went back in history, and you get satyrs, the Greek myths. They're ideal. They're an equivalent for the businessman or the Playboy bachelor or whoever that's chasing these girls. They did it professionally, satyrs. And nymphs, to me, had a certain weight to them, and Rubens and all that. I think there's more humor in a plump girl than there is in a sylph like. You don't laugh at one like that, and I don't want to be laughing at stout girls, but I think plump girls are humorous in real life. Yeah. They're more apt to be. You get a Vogue model, and I don't think she'll ever be funny. There's a lot of those pile-ups of Japanese people, and people are talking, very happy workshop tonight. All have found G-spot, even Mrs. Yamada. Search for the G-spot, all right.
I mean, he looked the part, but he wasn't, what do you call that type of guy, like Hugh Hefner. He wasn't doing it, and he never did it.
Well, it doesn't come from real life. No, it's observation. No, I was very conservative. All my friends are out screwing around, you might say. But I certainly wasn't. No. Yeah, open and shut right there.
A finish came back that had been accepted by Playboy, and there was a note attached to it by Hugh Hef that said, great job. your drawing is getting better and better every year. And I remember the look on his face when he saw those words from F, and it was just true. This is what I need to see. You know, I just need to see this. So that's why, even though, you know, here he is 84 and he's been doing all these Playboys, that's why you can still get satisfaction out of that. Not only to be viable as to still be employed in your 80s, doing what you love to do, but you get recognition like that.
You observe, but you hope to hell you're making a point out there. No, that really is the target. You know, I don't sit around and say, I am an observer. What is my observation? Does it mean anything? And I might say most cartoons don't mean a hill of beans, but the ones that you hit are very satisfying. When you look at the history of the world, it's always going to be illustrated with something. And many times it's a cartoon. A lot of those Soviet jokes I did come out in textbooks. Who's commenting on it? It's the cartoonist. And he comments it concisely. Other people wrote about it, but they, you know, 2,000 words. It's probably read then and never again, only by a historian who, yeah. And then he may find a cartoon that says it all in one line or one picture with no words. Soviet government, man, they almost wrote their own humor. I was going to do a Lenin book, and then the wall came down. Lenin Marxist. And I was probably one of the few disappointed people that it was over. You know, Stalin was mean and terrible. But by the time it gets to Malenkov and Khrushchev, you know, the inherent humor of their dictating to human beings, they were going to work. They said they invented everything. Remember? They invented everything. Telephone, telegraph, you know, the automobile. So I did this drawing. It was a Soviet school, and big picture of Lenin. I love to put Lenin in the background. And he said, as you all know, jazz came up the Don from Rostov. But here's a store in Moscow, and it says on the wall, on the thing, just like we do here, Moscow, Leningrad, Odessa, Paris, Beverly Hills, Palm Beach.
Right.
You know, branches.
Right.
No, I had an uncle that some people never could understand.
Gleb had escaped Russia in 1916, the revolution, and traveled across China and made his way to America.
My uncle Gleb, he was my source. How to spell Russian names if I needed a sign in the background, or, you know, perspective.
In the 50s, when the Cold War was starting, and then you had the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 60s, he would always go to Gleb and make sure that the Russian characters he was putting down in the cartoon were correct, you know, to the letter. He wanted to make sure that it was true. He was also doing a variety of other things. There were ads for cocktail mixes or recipes for drinks that his ads would appear on. Just all sorts of little things. He was constantly moving in different directions.
I did a lot of things. Pharmaceutical ads, mattress, Mutual of Omaha, Scrabble. I can't remember toilet paper, but it could have been in there. I remember once I refused. You know, this copy is all lined up. You just fill in the illustration. It was on a deodorant, and it was the most distasteful thing I ever saw. I said, I refuse to do that. And they couldn't understand it. Well, I didn't feel I was an advertising artist. I was doing the other. You know, that underarm smell, and it just didn't, you know, I got to sign my name to that drawing, and it's a stinky ad. I don't know. I'm not against deodorants, but there's a better way to do the thing, I thought. Maybe I was on a high horse that week, and maybe I had a lot of money that week.
In the early 60s, my father was working for The New Yorker. Many people and situations looked like Jacqueline Kennedy. And so he drew a cartoon depicting two ladies looking at the Sphinx on a tour of Egypt. And the Sphinx had a distinct, look of Jackie Kennedy. My father received a telegram from the secretary to Jackie and asking if the cartoon might be for sale. The response my father gave was, "No, the cartoon isn't for sale, but I would give it to you if you'd like it."
Many years later, when Jackie died, there was an auction in New York. Two women went. These two women went to school with her. One of them lived in Paris, the other lived in St. Lucia, and they used to visit her. And it was in the library, and they always loved it. They bid on it and got it. What makes me sad now is that I'm old so fast, that it's over with. It's not over, but I mean, yeah, that kind of, I'd like to be around, do more, see what happens, but then I also know how life is lived, so be thankful for a good life, and I honestly say I had a good life. You sit around being sad, no. Get up each morning and I hope I can drink wine again and be happy.
If you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be?
I'd say oak. I grew up in oaks. That's what southern Monterey County on the west side is, nothing but oak. Yeah, and they become beautiful trees. The old cliche, strong as an oak, and all that stuff. Yeah. What I remember on the ranch, there was a big oak tree over our blacksmith's implement shop. And when oaks get old, they really spread those limbs, and some of them the limb is this big, the trunk is bigger. And during the hot summer, limbs, when it got really hot, got 106 up there sometimes, would crack and crack off. There's just something about heat and the oak, old oaks. And it just dropped suddenly. If there's anything underneath, man, you had it. And that oak over this building cracked one day on a hot day. Man, we walked around, we never walked under it for weeks. And my father couldn't stand it anymore because he had implements in the shed and he had to go in. So we put a stick of dynamite, put a ladder up on the other side, drilled holes in, put dynamite in there, we're gonna blow the thing. So we did, nothing happened, the limb was still there. Now we felt in worse trouble. When is it gonna go? So for weeks we didn't go around it. And then one night, the ranch house was, quite a ways away. We heard, woke us up. We all felt relieved. The branch fell. Okay, my story of oaks, I'd be an oak.
Yeah.